Hey everybody, this is Kevin again. I want to show you something today that might make you think a little bit, might make you kind of wonder what's going on. This is something that I basically was presented with in a video, which I'm going to give you a link to that video in the description box, and I'm going to give you a link to this PDF file, this document, okay? I hope that YouTube does not remove it, because I'm going to show you some truth, and it may startle you unless you've seen this already. First of all, this document is called Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development, made by the Rockefeller Foundation. Okay? And we'll scroll down a little bit, and you see it was produced, this report was produced by the Rockefeller Foundation and Global Business Network in May 2010, okay? That's when they created this, in May of 2010. Now, I want to show you some information that's in here. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but I'm going to show you some interesting things that I saw in the film, and you can go and look at the film that I looked at also. It's not on YouTube, it's off of a web page, because apparently, supposedly that video was on YouTube and got removed. I don't know for sure, but that's what I was told. If they end up moving this video off of YouTube from me, I'll put it on another format like Brighteon on my account there, and I'll let you know in a separate video if that happens. Okay, so let's go down here. I want to show you something very interesting. Let's see. Okay, here we go. You see these four different things? It says, once crossed, these axes create a matrix of four different futures: lockstep, clever together, hack attack, and smart scramble. Now, what we're going to concentrate on and look at really carefully is lockstep. Okay. Okay, so these are scenario narratives, okay, that they came up with in 2010. Here it is, lockstep. And I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit so you can see it better. But it says at the top there, it says, a world of tighter top-down government control and more authoritarian leadership with limited innovation and growing citizen pushback. Now, let's kind of zoom in a little bit here. Let's look at this a little bit closer. In 2012, now remember this was written in 2010. In 2012, the pandemic that the world had been anticipating for years finally hit. Unlike 2009's H1N1, this new influenza strain originating from wild geese was extremely virulent and deadly. Even the most pandemic-prepared nations were quickly overwhelmed when the virus streaked around the world, infecting nearly 20% of the global population and killing 8 million in just 7 months, the majority of them healthy young adults. The pandemic also had a deadly effect on economies. International mobility of both people and goods screeched to a halt, debilitating industries like tourism and breaking global supply chains. Even locally, normally bustling shops and office buildings sat empty for months, devoid of both employees and customers. I'll go over to this column. The pandemic blanketed the planet, though disproportionate numbers died in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central America, where the virus spread like wildfire in the absence of official containment protocols. But even in developed countries, containment was a challenge. The United States' initial policy of strongly discouraging citizens from flying proved deadly in its leniency, accelerating the spread of the virus not just within the U.S., but across borders. However, a few countries did fare better China in particular. The Chinese government's quick imposition and enforcement of mandatory quarantine for all citizens, as well as its instant and near hermetic sealing off of all borders, saved millions of lives, stopping the spread of the virus far earlier than in other countries and enabling a swifter post-pandemic recovery. I'm going to continue on here, down further, okay? China's government was not the only one that took extreme measures to protect its citizens from risk and exposure. During the pandemic, national leaders around the world flexed their authority and imposed airtight rules and restrictions, from the mandatory wearing of face masks to body temperature checks at the entries to communal spaces like train stations and supermarkets. Even after the pandemic faded, this more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even intensified. In order to protect themselves from the spread of increasingly global problems, from pandemics and transnational terrorism to environmental crises and rising poverty, leaders around the world took a firmer grip on power. At first, the notion of a more controlled world gained wide acceptance and approval. Citizens willingly gave up some of their sovereignty and their privacy to more paternalistic states in exchange for greater safety and stability. Citizens were more tolerant and even eager for top-down direction and oversight, and national leaders had more latitude to impose order in the ways they saw fit. In developed countries, this heightened oversight took many forms. Biometric IDs for all citizens, for example, and tighter regulation of key industries whose stability, I'll go back up here, was deemed vital to national interest. In many developed countries, enforced cooperation with a suite of new regulations and agreements slowly but steadily restored both order and, importantly, economic growth. Across the developing world, however, the story was different and much more variable. Top-down authority took different forms in different countries, hinging largely on the capacity, caliber, and intentions of their leaders. In countries with strong and thoughtful leaders, citizens' overall economic status and quality of life increased. In India, for example, air quality drastically improved after 2016, when the government outlawed high-emitting vehicles. In Ghana, the introduction of ambitious government programs to improve basic infrastructure and ensure the availability of clean water for all her people led to a sharp decline in waterborne diseases. But more authoritarian leadership worked less well, and in some cases tragically, in countries run by irresponsible elites who use their increased power to pursue their own interest at the expense of their citizens. There were other downsides as the rise of violent nations or nationalism created new hazards. Anyway, it goes on a little bit further in the lockstep, but the main part that I wanted to really show you was really this, especially this part here about the mandatory wearing of face masks to body temperature checks at the entries to communal places. Okay. That plus what we saw up at the beginning here about this pandemic they said was going to happen in 2012. This scenario of this pandemic happening in 2012, it did not happen in 2012. But when it started in 2019, it's going on right now in 2020. If this is the same thing they were talking about. Which brings up the question of, based on this document in 2010, was this planned out to happen? If so, that means it wasn't just some accident. That means this is not an accident, that the entire world is in a lockdown situation and people being told to stay home and wear a face mask wherever they go. The economy's being destroyed. I mean, our economy with we had such a great economy before this happened, this lockdown, and now it's been just decimated, and there's millions of Americans out of work. I'm thankful that I'm still working, but I know there's a lot of people that are not. A lot of small businesses that are not open, can't be open because they're not deemed to be essential. And even in these other countries, and you'll see this if you look at that video that I've got a link to. If you look at that video, you'll see that they show a lot of conditions in other countries. We thought it was bad here, but their governments over there are very stringent. And some of those governments are to the point of, if they see you outside and you don't have a mask on, they're beating you, literally. Like in India, literally beating you. And in Africa, shooting tear gas at people. So, further on down this document, I don't know if I want to go there, but another thing that they introduce after this lockstep is, I believe that's right, they talk about global climate change and how they can do things to keep that from happening, and reduce the carbon emissions and all this kind of thing. This is where all this stuff comes from, folks. It comes from organizations like this and from the United Nations, and it filtered down into our government before President Trump came around with it. President Obama, he was really into this thing. So this Clever Together section here, they go into talking about, what they can, I got to show you this, okay? I've got to read this part, this first part of this section of Clever Together. A world in which highly coordinated and successful strategies emerge for addressing both urgent and entrenched worldwide issues. Okay? The recession of 2008 to 2010 did not turn into the decades-long global economic slide that many had feared. In fact, quite the opposite. Strong global growth returned in force, with the world headed once again toward the demographic and economic projections forecasted before the downturn. India and China were on track to see their middle classes explode to 1 billion by 2020. Megacities like Sao Paulo and Jakarta expanded at a blistering pace as millions poured in from rural areas. Countries raced to industrialize by whatever means necessary. The global marketplace bustled. But two big problems loom. First, not all people and places benefited equally from this return to globalized growth. Listen to this part. All boats were rising, but some were clearly rising more. Second, those hell-bent on development, and expansion largely ignored the very real environmental consequences of their unrestricted growth. Undeniably, the planet's climate was becoming increasingly unstable. Sea levels were rising fast, even as countries continued to build out coastal megacities. In 2014, remember they wrote this in 2010, in 2014, the Hudson River overflowed into New York City during a storm surge, turning the World Trade Center site into a 3-foot deep lake. The image of motorboats navigating through lower Manhattan jarred the world's most powerful nations into realizing that climate change was not just a developing world problem. That same year, new measurements showing that atmospheric carbon dioxide levels were climbing precipitously created new urgency and pressure for governments, really for everyone, to do something fast. So that didn't happen, okay? It hasn't happened yet. But remember, they were saying basically in 2012 is when this big pandemic was going to happen, okay? Which it waited until 2019 and 2020, right? But now in this, they're saying in 2014, the Hudson River overflowed into New York City during a storm surge, and that people were, going down through the roads on motorboats in lower Manhattan and all this kind of stuff due to climate change, rising waters. So, you see where they're going with that. You see where they're trying to push that narrative of climate change, and we've got to do things to stop climate change. And as I've said before, man is not in control of the climate. God is in control of the climate. And if God wants the waters to rise, he will make them rise. If he wants, things to happen in the climate, crazy weather, it will happen. But man is not going to stop the things from happening that will happen by way of, not driving internal combustion engine cars anymore, or flying planes, or any of that kind of thing. But they're using this issue. They're using this issue right now, and they're saying that as a result of this lockdown, people in California, like in Los Angeles, California, like they're saying, like, wow, the sky looks a lot clearer right now. There's not as much smog in the air. They're going to use that to try to push that agenda of the Green New Deal and that kind of issue, the thing of climate change, right? So I just wanted to bring this to your attention as we look at the time frame that we're living in right now. And these are just crazy times that we're living in. So I just wanted to bring this to your attention, and you can think what you want to, whether or not you think that this was something that might have been planned or not. It just seems kind of odd to me. But when I saw this, and they show this in the video as well, it just made me think that all this was not just by accident. So with that, I'm just going to say bye for now, and I hope all of you are doing okay out there. I don't know of anybody, I hope I won't, I don't know of anybody that's been infected by the coronavirus or died from it. I hope you don't either. That's why these numbers that they show of deaths from it, or we can't confirm it, we don't know. But with that, I'm going to say bye for now. And if you have any comments, you can make comments on the channel of anything that you know or what you think about this. Bye for now.